The Young and the Restless. Spoilers. Thurdays. Full episodes December 26, 2020. For the storm inside Sharon's house. Phyllis burst into Sharon's home with the force of a hurricane, her fiery temper ignited by the accusations swirling around them both. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself, she simply appeared, eyes blazing, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You think you can fool everyone, Sharon? Hypnosis? Lies? You've manipulated everyone into believing you're innocent, but I know better." Phyllis spat, pointing an accusing finger at Sharon. "You killed Heather, didn't you? And now you're trying to frame Daniel to save yourself." Sharon stood frozen for a moment, the accusations echoing in her mind. She had sworn to herself that she wasn't the one who killed Heather, but Phyllis's words cut deeper than she cared to admit. The room seemed smaller, suffocating, as Phyllis's tirade continued. "You're a coward, Sharon," Phyllis snarled. "Hiding behind Nick, playing the victim. But you're not fooling me. You've always been a liar, and now you're a murderer, too." Sharon's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "I didn't kill Heather," she said firmly, her eyes locking with Phyllis's. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't know why you're so determined to blame me." Phyllis let out a bitter laugh. "Because I know your type. Sweet, innocent Sharon, always playing the damsel in distress. But when it comes down to it, you'll do whatever it takes to protect yourself, even if it means destroying someone else's life." The weight of guilt. Sharon's mind raced as Phyllis's words hit closer to home than she expected. She hadn't killed Heather, she was certain of that, but she couldn't deny that she had made mistakes. In her desperation to clear her name, she had shifted suspicion onto Daniel, subtly planting seeds of doubt in others. It wasn't intentional, or so she told herself, it was survival. But survival had its price. Sharon could see it now in the cracks forming between Nick and Daniel, in the growing animosity that threatened to destroy their already fragile relationships. She had meant to protect herself, but in doing so, she had sown chaos. Nick and Daniel, a tenuous truce. Meanwhile, Nick and Daniel met in the neutral space of a quiet cafe, their conversation heavy with tension. Nick had requested the meeting, hoping to bridge the growing divide between them. Daniel, however, approached with wariness, his guard firmly in place. "Thanks for coming," Nick began, his tone measured. "I wanted to clear the air." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Clear the air? Is that what this is? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're here to defend Sharon again." Nick sighed, rubbing his temples. "Daniel, listen. I know you're angry, and I get it. But Sharon isn't the one who killed Heather. She's just trying to figure things out like the rest of us." Daniel's expression darkened. "You don't get it, Nick. My mother has been through hell because of this. Everyone's looking at her like she's the villain, and Sharon isn't doing a damn thing to stop it. In fact, she's making it worse." The two men locked eyes, the tension between them palpable. Nick leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "I'm not here to defend Sharon blindly, Daniel. I'm here because I believe in her. I believe she didn't do this. And I believe in my mother," Daniel shot back. "And until Sharon owns up to what she's done, hypnosis, lies, and all, I don't see how we move past this." Their conversation ended on a tenuous note, neither man willing to fully concede but both aware of the futility of their fight. They parted with a strained handshake, their truce more fragile than either cared to admit. A rift between families. The growing animosity between Nick and Daniel began to spill over into their families. Daniel's unwavering defense of Phyllis put him at odds with those who believed in Sharon's innocence, while Nick's loyalty to Sharon made him a target of suspicion in Phyllis's camp. The once intertwined lives of the Newmans and Romulatis were unraveling, their bonds fraying under the weight of mistrust. For Nick, the situation was particularly painful. He had tried to protect Sharon, to shield her from the worst of the accusations, but it was becoming increasingly clear that his efforts were only deepening the divide. His loyalty to Sharon was unwavering, but it came at a cost: his relationship with Daniel, with Phyllis, and perhaps even with his own family. Sharon's internal struggle back at her home. Sharon sat alone, the echoes of Phyllis's accusations still ringing in her ears. She wasn't a murderer, she knew that, but the guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her. She had tried to protect herself, but in doing so, she had hurt others, including Daniel and Phyllis. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, Sharon made a silent vow to herself. I didn't kill Heather. And I'm going to prove it, not just to them, but to myself. But as she spoke those words, a nagging doubt crept into her mind. If she wasn't the one who killed Heather, then who was? The answer remained elusive, shrouded in a web of secrets and lies. The mystery deepens, the truth about Heather's death remained maddeningly out of reach. Phyllis was convinced of Sharon's guilt, while Sharon maintained her innocence. Nick and Daniel, caught in the crossfire, struggled to find common ground, their loyalty to the women in their lives pulling them in opposite directions. And yet, beneath the surface, there were questions that no one dared to ask. Why had Heather been killed? What was the motive, and who stood to gain from her death? The answers lay buried in the shadows, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to uncover them. In the end, the battle between Sharon, Phyllis, Nick, and Daniel was only the beginning. The true fight was yet to come, as the search for Heather's killer threatened to expose secrets that none of them were prepared to face. Victor's lonely Christmas. The Newman Ranch, usually a bustling hub of activity, was eerily silent on Christmas Eve. Victor Newman, the patriarch of one of Genoa City's most powerful families, sat alone in his grand living room. The glow of the fireplace illuminated his face, but it did little to warm the cold emptiness he felt inside. His children were preoccupied, Victoria was immersed in Newman Enterprises, Adam had distanced himself as usual, and Nick was caught in the drama surrounding Sharon and Phyllis. Even Nikki, his beloved wife, had chosen to spend the evening at a charity event she had been planning for months. And so, Victor found himself alone, the silence of the sprawling estate echoing louder than any holiday carol. At 80 years old, Victor had seen it all, the triumphs and defeats, love and heartbreak. But this Christmas, a new kind of pain gnawed at him, loneliness. The weight of his years pressed heavily on him, and for the first time, he felt the chill of the season not just in the air, but in his soul. Victor's thoughts turned, as they often did, to the Abbott family. Jack Abbott and his brood were likely gathered together, basking in the warmth of togetherness. The thought infuriated him. Jack, his lifelong rival, seemed to have everything Victor lacked at that moment, a family that loved and supported him unconditionally. The shadow of conflict, Victor's resentment toward the Abbotts, simmered as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every situation, to bend circumstances to his will. But this year, the Abbotts had the upper hand, and it ate at him. He contemplated ways to disrupt their idyllic holiday, to remind them that Victor Newman was not a man to be ignored or underestimated. Yet, even as he plotted, a deep sadness undercut his usual fire. For all his power, for all his wealth, Victor Newman was spending Christmas alone. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built an empire, yet he couldn't summon his family to share a meal. The bitterness of his thoughts was interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing. A conversation with Claire, Victor's granddaughter, had called to wish him a Merry Christmas. Her voice, bright and full of youth, was a balm to his weary spirit. But as they spoke, the conversation took a deeper turn. "Grandpa," Claire began hesitantly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about Kyle." Victor's eyes narrowed. "What about him?" Claire sighed. "I thought I was doing the right thing by standing up for him, by trying to be my own person. But I've realized, maybe I've been too quick to ignore your advice. You've always had a way of seeing things clearly, of knowing what's best." Victor's voice softened, a rare tenderness slipping through his usual gruff demeanor. "Claire, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about understanding who you are and what you deserve. I've made mistakes, plenty of them, but my family, they're the most important thing in my life." Claire hesitated before responding. "I want to change, Grandpa. I don't want to keep making decisions that hurt the people I care about. I want to do better." Victor felt a flicker of hope. Claire's words were sincere, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had truly connected with one of his grandchildren. "Then do it, my dear," he said firmly. "You have the power to change your life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." A Christmas revelation. As the call ended, Victor sat back, his thoughts lingering on Claire's words. Perhaps there was hope for the Newman family after all. If Claire could see the value in his guidance, maybe the others would follow. Maybe he wouldn't have to spend every Christmas like this, alone, with only his grudges to keep him company. For Claire, the conversation with Victor was a turning point. She had been so determined to assert her independence, to prove she didn't need her grandfather's approval, that she hadn't stopped to consider the consequences. But now, she saw things differently. Victor wasn't just a powerful man, he was a man who had lived, who had learned hard lessons and wanted to pass them on. That Christmas, Claire resolved to make amends, to rebuild the relationships she had let falter. And Victor, for all his bluster and pride, allowed himself a moment of quiet gratitude. The warmth of family might have eluded him this year, but perhaps next Christmas would be different. The Abbott family's celebration. Meanwhile, at the Abbott mansion, laughter filled the air. Diane, Jack, Kyle, and the rest of the family were wrapped in the joy of the season, oblivious to the storm brewing in Victor's mind. For now, they were safe in their bubble of happiness, unaware that Victor Newman's gaze was fixed firmly on them. But even Victor, in his solitude, couldn't entirely ignore the spirit of the season. As he raised his glass to the empty room, he muttered a quiet toast, to family, imperfect, infuriating, but always worth fighting for. The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the Newman ranch in white. And for a moment, Victor allowed himself to hope.